I'm Andrew Clavin, and this is a story I wrote called Another Kingdom, performed by Michael Knowles. In the last episode, Austin Lively was taken at gunpoint to a remote mansion. There, he punched the murderous gunman known as Kittenface in the mouth, and the killer swore to make him pay. But before Kittenface could exact his revenge, his boss showed up, billionaire Serge Orozco. A man with deep connections to Austin Lively, Orozco showed himself to be a madman with a plan to remake the world in his own image. He allowed Austin to live, but only if Austin swore to bring him the book called Another Kingdom. And now, Another Kingdom, Episode 8.
The stallion and I had just come through the Eastrom city gates. The horse was still traveling slowly amidst the crowd of pilgrims and the cloud of their dust. I was still a little hazy on Orozco's wine. I looked around me unsteadily. Peasants and merchants and a knight on horseback were all staring at me because, I suddenly realized, I'd shouted out in exasperation to find myself back here again, "Oh shit." As I struggled to come to terms with this latest transition, it occurred to me that I didn't need all these curious eyes staring at me, especially not when I was being hunted by the authorities and still within arrow shot of the guards on the city wall. I snapped the horse's reins and guided him off the road. I urged him into the surrounding grassland with a brisk clucking noise, trying to put some distance between me and the rest of the travelers. My mad dinner with Orozco and the strange story he'd told me and, yes, the fear and the wine were all still sloshing around in my brain. And really, I just wanted to lie down somewhere and make this whole ordeal stop for a while. I mean, what the fuck, you know? What the actual fuck? I would have said that this going back and forth between two worlds was driving me crazy, except I must have already gone crazy or none of it would have been happening in the first place. The stallion and I had moved a couple of dozen yards away from the dense crowd of people exiting the city when I felt a pinch on my foot. I looked down and saw Maud. The mutant rodent had leapt up out of the high weeds and grabbed me. And now she scrambled lightly, quickly, up my leggings and over the side of my saddle to take her place on the pommel again. I groaned loudly. The rodent turned to me. "What? What's the matter?" "What's the matter?" I wanted to say. "What's the fucking matter? You're a fucking rat with a woman's face, that's what's the matter. You can talk, that's what's the matter. Best case scenario, you're the emanation of a brain tumor. And even if I could cure the tumor and make you and this entire La La Land disappear, I'd only find myself back in La La Land proper with an insane billionaire and his gender-bending psycho killer after me. That's what's the fucking matter," I wanted to say. "Nothing," I muttered sullenly. The mutant creature nodded brusquely, then leaned over to whisper in the horse's ear. Because, of course, the horse could understand what the rat woman was saying. Because that's what it's like when there's a black growth the size of a cantaloupe devouring your cerebral cortex. "To Shadow Wood," the rodent said to the horse. "Huzzah. To fucking Shadow Wood." And off we rode. I will say this much for Galliana. It was a haunting Gothic ruin of a country, sere and desolate and starkly beautiful. Once we broke full away from the others, we rode for hours in majestic loneliness, across a blasted landscape under a looming, gathering dusk. Solitary, leafless trees bent wearily in the wind here and there, their branches rattling. Empty huts and broken towers rose on the horizon, grew large as they approached and grimly hunkered over us, then fell away behind. Now and then, at some abandoned window, in some fallen wreckage of a fortress or a home, or on some dusty path that once had been a highway, a wide-eyed starveling would turn to watch us pass, the remnant of what had sometime been a man or a woman. I saw the wistful hunger wreathing the faces of these people as we went by them. They looked as if they half remembered a longed-for time of human warmth and connection, but that time was gone. I wanted to ask them, what happened here? What happened to this country? But the effect of the wine was wearing off. I was exhausted and didn't have the energy to listen to an answer. I just rode on in silence over the windswept land. As the sun was descending toward the horizon, we crossed a long, flat autumn vale. In the fading distance, I could make out the front line of a forest, red oaks and orange elms and yellow hickories and smoky green conifers and cool, shadowy depths within. "Is that it?" I asked the rodent. "Is that Shadow Wood?" "Yes," she told me. "Toratanio's kingdom." We reached the forest at sunset. Maud jumped down and told me to dismount, and I poured off the saddle like spilled gelatin. Leading the horse by the reins, I followed the mutant rodent into the trees. Almost at once, the mist gathered around us, and the leaves folded over us, and the last light of day went dim. We were suddenly moving through a deep gloom, already shading into darkness. Maud scrambled ahead like a squirrel and quickly blended, like a squirrel would, with the tangled latticework of vines and branches. That latticework seemed to close in on me, so that each direction looked the same as every other. The mist drifted eerily like fingers between the trees, further obscuring the way. Occasionally, the last red glint of the falling sun shot through a gap in the branches and reached me. Otherwise, the deep twilight simply grew deeper as night came on. Soon, I could barely see a foot in front of me. Soon after that, the forest became alive with noises. Peeper frogs came out and held their high-pitched conversations. Crickets jabbered, and things I couldn't name moved along the ground, rattling the duff. A breeze coiled through the branches, and their brittle leaves shivered. In the thickening darkness, the forest seemed to fill with whispers. I slowed down, looking around me. I was a city boy. I didn't like it here. Even back home, in real life, if I found myself alone in the middle of nowhere after sunset, I got nervous. Scenes from horror movies would come into my mind. Vampires, werewolves, ghosts. Stupid, I know. Stupid there anyway, back in real life. Here, in Galiana, who could tell? There might actually be vampires and werewolves and ghosts lurking in the darkness. And by the way, where had Squirrel Girl gone? I could no longer find her in the darkness. "Maud?" I called. It came out as a dusty whisper. My mouth had gone dry. I stood very still. I listened, hoping to hear her answer. For a moment, there was only the living noise of the forest. But then, faintly amidst the creature chatter and the sough of the breeze and the creak of branches and the rattle of leaves, there came another sound. A sound like music. It was eerie, uncanny. A lingering melody just off key. It chilled me, like a specter's touch. I don't think I had ever heard a song so strange, so otherly. I felt I had lost the power to move. I couldn't do anything but stand there, listening, waiting to see what would happen next. What happened next, so help me, was this. The eerie melody grew louder. I caught glimpses among the distant trees of twinkling lights and swirling rainbow-colored clouds. The forest seemed to grow a little brighter, the tortuous shapes of vines and the skeletal fingers of branches that had moments before become invisible as the daylight died began to re-emerge as the black of night turned indigo. The eerie music filled the woods surrounding me. I could hear it more clearly now. Pipes and tambourines, and a ghostly choir of inhuman voices, high and wild. The sparks of light and the clouds of light grew brighter. Soon these surrounded me as well. The air was fluttering, full of fairies. The shadowed woods were dancing with imps and antlered fawns and satyrs with their pipes of Pan and peak-capped trolls and sentient creatures that I couldn't name crawling along the duff and on the branches. In the swirling mists of light, I saw a broad stream winding toward me between the tree trunks, and out of the water, nymphs were rising like mist, glowing nude women of an ivory perfection that made me swell with a kind of bold, natural, robust, erotic desire that was nothing like the clammy lust I felt leering at the wannabes on LA's streets or at the naked girls in my computer. It seemed I hadn't felt like this in ages. The weird, weird music played and played. The colored lights glittered and swirled. The fairy tale creatures flew and gamboled and danced around me in an impossible vision of secret forest life. And the nymphs approached and circled me in the rainbow glow, their faces lovely, their bodies exquisitely rounded and soft. I watched breathless as they closed in. I gasped as they touched me. Some caressed me, some undressed me. Some took me gently by the arms and led me to the stream. I could not have resisted them if I had wanted to. I didn't want to. They drew me naked along the banks of the water. We came to a clearing where the stream gathered in a pool. The fairies and the fauns and the imps and the satyrs were dancing here as well with their lights and music. The nymphs took me into the pool. The water was warmer than I expected. It was velvety smooth and soft, and only waist-high. The nymphs bathed me and kissed my neck and cheeks and stroked my body until I raised my face to the stars and cried out in mindless ecstasy, purged of every dark and dirty thing. My weariness was gone. My fear of the forest dark was gone. Even my skinned knee and the pulsing bruise on my head from where Sir Eravist had struck me with his sword was healed and gone. The music played, and I lowered my eyes and gazed in wonder at the tender faces of the nymphs eddying around me in the eddying water. I didn't care that there were creatures on every side who might be watching. I didn't care about anything just then. All I knew was that I never wanted this to end. But now the nymphs gently led me up out of the pool into the clearing. I felt calm and satisfied and clean. They dried me off with some soft white wool and dressed me in my clothes again, and my clothes felt crisp and clean as well. I noticed now that the piping, jingling music of the wood had changed. It had grown steady and rhythmic and ceremonial, almost martial. I noticed that the creatures were slowing in their dance, and now they stopped. They stood where they were and turned to gaze into the distance. I followed their gazes and looked to where the colored outglow ended and the forest sunk back into the blue-black dark beyond. Now, out of that darkness, there came a stately procession. What I thought at first was a brigade of cavalry was coming through the trees in double file at a slow march. As they grew nearer, I saw they weren't cavalry, not mounted men, but centaurs. Men with the lower halves of horses, and their top halves muscular male figures carrying sabers at their shoulders. Female centaurs, lighter in color but with the same muscular grace, rode on the outskirts of the ranks, in attendance on their soldier men. They marched closer, and in the midst of them, two figures seemingly all of light manifested themselves. First, the darkness glowed a little in the two places. Then each glow expanded, then each congealed into a radiant figure, and then the figures grew solid while still remaining luminous. The figure to the left was a rotund, heavily bearded man, his eyes bright and merry, his cheeks red, and his high forehead crowned with leaves. He was in a chariot made of light, and the chariot was drawn by 4 horses of light who pawed the empty air above the ground as they flew along, pulling him after. The figure in the chariot to the right of him was a woman the color of the moon, long and lithe and unbelievably beautiful, with moon-colored hair and drifting robes that seemed to flow off her like water. "That's Toratanio and Magdala! They rule the forest!" whispered Maud. She had suddenly reappeared, clinging by her claws to the trunk of the tree beside me. Her weird woman's face was giving me an ironic, knowing look. My cheeks went hot as it occurred to me she might have been watching when I was getting it on with the nymphs in the water. But there wasn't much I could do about it now. I turned again to watch the oncoming parade. Escorted by their centaur cavalry, the king and queen entered the clearing in their chariots of light. I have to admit, if this was a hallucination caused by a brain disorder, and let's face it, what the hell else could it have been, it was a damned majestic one. The 2 forest royals dismounted and moved hand in hand to 2 thrones of light that had manifested themselves miraculously out of the dark at the center of the grove. They sat and the court formed around them. Nymphs, satyrs, fauns, and peak-capped trolls, and all the rest in semicircular rows at their feet, while the fairies sparkled in the surrounding trees like Christmas lights. The king's voice boomed, jovial and mellow. "Show me the man." That apparently meant me. The nude nymphs took me gently by my arms and led me before the thrones. I stood before the king and queen, squinting into their light. Toratanio looked me up and down. I could see the smile buried in the thick beard beneath his twinkling eyes. Magdala, his queen, examined me too with a sweet, serene regard. I was still swathed in the post-coital calm of my encounter with the nymphs, so I was not as nervous under their gazes as I might have been. Still, instinctively, I bowed my head to the 2 light figures. Somehow I found I wanted to please them. I wanted them to like me. The king now cast a look beyond me at Maud. He nodded to her as if, I thought, to thank her for carrying out my rescue. I turned in time to see the girl rat shrug her rodent shoulders as if to say, "He's not much, I know, but he's all I could find." Toratanio laughed a Santa Claus laugh. "So," he said, and I faced him. "So you're Austin Lively." How crazy was it to hear this king of silver light speak my everyday name? Crazy. But at this point, crazy was my default setting. I nodded. "Yes. And Queen Elinda sent you?" I raised my hands helplessly. "I don't know the queen." "She knows you, apparently." The forest lady spoke from beside him. Her voice flowed like her robes and her hair. "And the important thing is, you've come." It was the oddest thing. They were speaking as if everything that was happening made sense to them, as if all this were real and even normal instead of impossible and insane. And you know what else was bizarre? Besides everything, I mean? What was also bizarre was that this conversation I was having now was no more incomprehensible to me than the conversation I just had in L.A. with Orozco. In some ways, this here, was not even as disturbing as that, because it didn't mean I had to reconsider my entire life, and who my parents were, and what my brother did, and how I fit into it all. I just had to, I don't know, accept that what couldn't possibly be happening was happening. But how? I asked them, turning from one to the other. How did I get here? That's the wrong question, my dear, Magdala said sweetly. The right question, said Turritanio with a deep chuckle, is why? I raised my hands again, just as helplessly as before. All right then. Why? To find the Queen's talisman and deliver it to Emperor Anastasius, said the king, as if this ought to have been obvious to anyone. So he knows to return from the 11 lands and restore her to her throne. Right, the talisman, the 11 lands, the Emperor Anastasius. Of course. What the hell was he talking about? But why me? I said. It was the first of the million questions in my mind to come tumbling out of my mouth. Because there are no more men here, said Magdala. No fighting men, Turritanio said. No fighting men of brave heart and right belief, added Magdala. At this, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder again at Maud. The rodent rolled her eyes. Now I understood her impatience with me, her disapproving looks, that snappy order, be a man. Queen Elinda had sent me to Galliana because there were no more men here? No more fighting men of brave heart and right belief? She had sent me? Me? Were they kidding? What the hell was she thinking? I was no brave fighting man. I was from Hollywood. No one was brave there. Not brave, where maybe you died at the end with nobody watching. No one in show business had to be brave like that. You just had to pretend to be brave while they took pictures of you pretending. That was the whole job. And right belief? As I turned back to the forest king and queen, all of a sudden, and for the first time in my life, it occurred to me to wonder, what were my beliefs? And the answer came to me with plummeting nausea that broke clean through my nymphian satisfaction. I had no freaking idea. None. I believed what everyone believed, I guess. Be good, be nice, be fair, sell a script and direct a movie and become a star so I could give interviews on TV about how good and nice and fair I was, how brave. No men, I said in an ashen whisper. The knights have all been corrupted by Lord Iron, Turritanio explained with a tone of sorrow that sounded strangely not so different from his tone of joy. Just as Lord Iron has been corrupted by the Wizard Curtain. The Wizard Curtain? I thought in a daze. Who was he now? I didn't remember that name from the character list in my computer, but I did remember that spooky raisin-faced guy in the night blue robe who had stood behind Lord Iron during my tribunal, whispering in his ear. I guess that must have been the Wizard Curtain. And as for the men of the land, well, you saw them, Turritanio continued. Iron seduced them into rebellion with promises of a perfect country, good and nice and fair, where each is equal in all things to another. He echoed the very words swimming in my swimming brain. And Magdala, with her majestic sorrow, added, They tried to kill the wisest queen in all the world in the name of that illusion. They would have succeeded, too, if my husband had not used his magic to transport her to another kingdom. More echoing words. Another kingdom. Like the book? And this illusion of a perfect country. Was it anything like the age of Orozco? Was it possible the story of my life in L.A. and the story of my life here were the same story? Turritanio went on. I would have done more, but Curtain draws his magic from the minds of men and grows stronger in cities where men congregate. My magic is of the woods, and I did not have the power to defeat him on his own ground. I remembered my escape through the dungeon sewers, how I had to focus my mind to receive the power of Turritanio's magic in order to keep the fairy lights glowing. I remembered how Maud had sparkled from time to time in the dungeon and grew powerful as the magic came through her. Now I understood. King had used us somehow to cast his power from a distance, but its source was here. Abruptly, the expression on Turritanio's face, and Magdala's expression too, were transformed from expressions of sorrowful gravity to those of gladness and even celebration. It was as if, in spite of the poverty and meanness and cruelty I had seen on the toxic streets of Eastrom, the horrors of its torture chambers, and the injustice of its council, all was suddenly right with the world. And why? But our hero has come, Turritanio declared, gesturing with his light-made hand toward me. I swear, toward me. And now, Austin Lively, the king continued, his tone still joyful, to give heart and hope to my people, Prove to them you are the one Queen Elinda sent to us by claiming the gift she left for him, as only he can do." Uh-oh, I thought. But the truth is, I didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. I mean, obviously, if they were looking for a fighting man of brave heart and right belief, they had missed their target by about a mile. So whatever test I was supposed to pass now was going to result in some sort of low comic moment of total failure. And, on the one hand, that would get me off the hook for whatever the hell quest me and my brave heart and right belief were supposed to get ourselves killed over. On the other hand, some of those saber-carrying centaurs looked like pretty rough characters, and I hated to think what their reaction was going to be when they found out they had the wrong guy. As Turritanio spoke, he shifted the hand with which he was majestically gesturing at me in order to majestically gesture at something behind me. I turned around to see what it was. It was an oak tree. A big one. The kind that you find growing for like 1,000 years in some forest in England or someplace. I hadn't noticed it before, which was kind of odd given the size of it, but there it was now anyway, near the edge of the grove. Its trunk was as thick around as the trunk of a gigantic oak tree. I can't actually think of anything thicker around than that. Its branches sprung from it in all directions and rose into the forest night and fell to the forest floor like the legs of an alien spider in a science fiction film. Lit by the rainbow light of the fairies and the silver glow that emanated from the king and queen, its leaves showed themselves a rich copper gold that touched me somehow with its perfection and loveliness. This was the gift Elinda had left for her chosen hero? A big tree? What was I supposed to do with it? Hug it? Put it in my pocket with thanks all around? I glanced Maudwards for help, but all the rodent woman did was tilt her head toward the big tree, indicating I should approach it. I approached it, got a closer look. It was a big old tree, all right. I glanced around me. From every nook in the glowing forest, eyes looked back at me. The eyes of the forest king and queen, yes, and the eyes of the martial centaurs and their ladies. The eyes of the imps and elves and the trolls with their peak caps held humbly in their gnarly hands. The eyes of buzzing fairies hovering all aglow in the sable air. The eyes of fauns and satyrs with their pipes of Pan. And most moving of all, the tender eyes of nymphs with their forms and faces of heart-melting beauty. What would I not have done to please them? All those eyes were staring at me in hope and anticipation, waiting for me to do what? To do the thing that would assure them that I was who they so desperately needed me to be. And what the glorious hell was that? I glanced at Maud again. Her womanly eyes urged me on. Do it. Do what? I turned back to the tree. It was still a tree. I stared at it. The moments passed. Nothing happened. I felt all the eyes of the forest on me, all their hopes in me, and I did not know what I was supposed to do. Well, of course I didn't. I was not the guy. It broke my heart to admit it to myself, but I just wasn't the one they were waiting for. You only had to look at me to know it. More moments passed. More nothing happened. It was excruciating. I was about to turn to them all and confess the truth, but unable to bear the thought of destroying their hopes. Unable to face, most especially, the thought of seeing the disappointment in the eyes of the nymphs. I hesitated another second and another. Finally, in pure panicky desperation, I tried the only strategy I could think of, the only trick I'd learned since I had come here. I let go of myself. That is, I opened up my mind like opening a hand and let every thought of who I was fly free. And do you know what came to me? What came into that empty space where my thoughts of myself had been? That child came. That child that I once was. Remember, that boy of 5 or 6 or so, sitting on the floor in the back room of my parents' house? Sitting there while my parents and my brothers talked and my sister explored her secret spaces? Sitting there and arranging plastic figures and stories and tableaux? That little boy, lost in his own imaginative universe, in an act of creation, in a stillness of complete delight. For a moment, just a moment then, I not only remembered that little child, I became him. And in that moment I saw a light, a bright pinpoint of white light shining out at me from deep within the giant trunk of the giant oak. Just a pinpoint at first, but then it grew into a dragon-toothed star, a pulsing gleam in the core of the wood, and then that gleam grew and spread, and became a cloudy glow that flooded up through the trunk and out to the very tips of the great oak's branches. And as the oak filled with that ghostly light, its bark and wood seemed to lose their substance. They became transparent, so that standing there, amazed, I could see right into the oak's heart. I saw a sword. It was held there, hanging there, right in the center of the oak's trunk. Oh, it was a wonderful weapon, compact yet lithe and graceful, silver white and gleaming like the light that revealed it. My eyes filled looking at it, not just because of how beautiful it was, but because I could see it. I could see it. The wisest queen in all the world had left it there for me. Before I really knew what I was doing, I took a slow, mesmerized step toward the oak, and then another, as if the glowing sword in the glowing tree were a magic magnet pulling me to itself. I lifted my hand, reached out to the oak, and then, impossibly, my fingertips, my fingers, my hand, my arm passed directly through the bark and into the wood. I grasped the sword's hilt. I gasped as a shock of energy went through me. I heard a gasp, a dozen, 100 gasps in unison all around me, a collective sound of relief and gratification, one single sigh of joy. Open-mouthed with shock, frozen with surprise, trembling with wonder, I watched as the light of the sword began to spread up over my arm like quicksilver. It reached my shoulder in a second, and in another second bathed my whole torso, sped down my legs and up over my head at once until I was all clothed in it as in a suit of luminous liquid armor. Then, with a great electric swish and another shock of energy, all that silver light was sucked as if through my pores up into my body. There was an enormous flash, and the light went out. I was hurled back from the tree. I staggered on my heels, my arms pinwheeling for balance. I almost fell before I managed to steady myself. I stood there, dazed a moment, marveling. Then, my mouth still hanging open, I turned to look around me at the king and the queen and the waiting creatures of the wood. They were gone. The forest was empty, dark. The spectral music had ceased and the sounds of peepers and crickets filled the night. I was alone, or not quite alone.
"You better get some rest,"
Maud said, her nasal squeak coming from somewhere nearby.
"We'll have to get an early start in the morning."
Rest? I thought. Rest? Are you kidding me? How am I supposed to? But before I could even finish the thought, exhaustion washed over me like a great wave. I wilted under the weight of it, sinking down to the earth beneath the branches of the giant oak. I lay down there. I curled up on my side. In another second, I was fast asleep. I woke to find the first low beam of the rising sun piercing the autumn foliage to touch my face, and the horse, the black stallion, he was touching my face too, nuzzling me to get me up. I sat up quickly, stiff and shivering from sleeping on the cold earth. I blinked and looked around me at the morning forest, bright with light, loud with birdsong. My mind was blank for a second, and then the memories of the night before crowded in on me. You want to talk about some crazy shit? Try my memories. Serge Orozco landing in his helicopter. The king and queen of the forest escorted to the dance of fantastic creatures by ranks of armed centaurs. A gender-bending assassin shooting a drunken author dead. Me pulling the sword out of the oak. And if all that weren't nuts enough, a giant rat with a woman's face was looking down at me from the pommel of the stallion's saddle.
"We better get going,"
she said. I leapt to my feet, my heart pounding. I remembered the rest of it. In L.A., I had to find the book or the assassin would kill me. And here in Galiana, I had to find the queen's talisman, whatever the hell that was. Going where? I asked the squirrel girl groggily. Where are we going?
"You're the hero,"
she said dryly.
"It's your quest. You tell me."
I stared up at her on the pommel. She stared back, a droll, sarcastic stare. Never mind that I had pulled the silver sword out of the oak tree. Maud no more believed I was the hero sent by the queen than I believed I was the hero sent by the queen. Because the truth was, I had absolutely no clue what I was supposed to do next. And then, strangely enough, I kind of did. Out of the jumbled craziness of my impossible memories, one memory suddenly stood out. It was that moment when Lady Betheray had left the witness stand at my tribunal. She had just finished testifying that her friend, Lady Kata, the woman I was accused of murdering, had told her that I had gotten her pregnant. She had descended from the stand and walked past me, and she looked at me. It was a look full of betrayal and wounded love, and it came to me in that instant. It came to me like a memory from someone else's life, that I had kissed her sometime in the past. I had held her in my arms and kissed her, and we had loved one another. "We have to find Lady Betheray," I said. "She thinks I betrayed her with Lady Kata. She thinks I killed Kata."
"Well, didn't you?"
said the rodent woman. I felt a flash of anger and was about to bark at her. Hell no! But had I? I didn't think I had. But if I couldn't remember my love affair with a lady as spectacular as Betheray, what else had I forgotten? It seemed in coming to Galiana, I had walked into a story about myself that was already half over. What else had happened to me? What else had I done before I arrived? Murder? I didn't know. Well, I wasn't going to discuss it with a big girl rat. A man has some dignity, after all. Do you know where we can find her? I asked her. Maud sighed and looked away and shrugged her rodent shoulders.
I know her home is Netherdale. We can look for her there.
All right, I said. Let's go to Netherdale then. And after a few pathetic attempts to swing myself heroically into the saddle, I finally crawled up over the horse's side and dropped into place, and off we rode. Long before we reached Netherdale, whatever courage I had, and it wasn't much, began to fail me. We had been riding for hours, out of the woods and through the open country. I've never had a good sense of direction, but as near as I could tell, we were traveling at a narrow angle to the line between the city of Eastrom and the point where we'd entered the forest. That meant we were getting closer to the dangerous city precincts where the guards would be hunting for me, looking to bring me back to the torture chamber. The ruined Gallianan landscape, with its broken towers and abandoned villages, its withered plains and lonesome leafless trees, its staring phantoms of once human beings, a landscape that had had some ghostly charm when we were escaping, just seemed threatening now as I felt the Eastrom Castle and its dungeons growing near. Then we came up over a low rise, and I saw Netherdale. It stood alone amid blasted trees and weedy gardens, a big, looming, gloomy place. A great Gothic manse of gray-brown stone with frowning gables and lowering turrets and ivy clinging dark around black windows that suggested a soulless emptiness within. A road of dirt and broken cobbles with brown grass growing in between ran from the overgrown cul-de-sac before the house's front door and wound off to the vanishing points on the left and right. On the right, under a blue and white sky of swiftly moving clouds, a greenish pall hung over the low hills. I figured that must be the hellish smoke of Eastrom, the smoke of burning heretics and traitors. Instinctively, I drew back on the reins. The stallion came to a slow stop, whiffling. I looked down over the scene of tortuous naked black branches and tangled weeds. I admit it. I wanted to turn around and ride out of there as fast as I could. I was afraid. I glanced at Maud to see if she had noticed. She had. Of course she had. She was looking off into the distance, shaking her head with disgust, as if she couldn't believe she'd gotten stuck babysitting such a wimpish weakling. You and me both, sister, I thought. I started to say, but I didn't know what to say. Let's wait here a while, I finished lamely. The mutant rodent snorted. I felt ashamed. But I wasn't just going to charge down there like some gung-ho idiot to prove my manhood to a giant deformed squirrel. If Lady Betheray was there, her husband Lord Iron might be with her. And even if he wasn't with her, she wouldn't be unguarded. She thought I had slept with Lady Kata and then murdered her to cover up our affair. So the minute she saw me coming, she'd have me under arrest and on my way to the Eastrom dungeon to torture and death. I dismounted and led the stallion back down the rise a little ways so it wouldn't be visible from the house. Then I returned to the crest and lay down to watch the place, waiting for what? Well, I guess to see if I could get a sense of just how much trouble I was walking into. That's what I told myself anyway. For a long while, nothing happened. The autumn sun angled down the far arc of the sky, and the shadow of the Gothic manse grew long and dreadful on the stark face of the landscape. Now and then, I thought, I saw a movement at one of the windows, but the place was so dark inside I couldn't be sure. Maud, meanwhile, sighed and snorted and rolled her eyes, and ran back and forth down the hill for exercise, and basically did everything she could to make me feel like crap, thank you very much. As the sun sank lower and lower, I became more and more convinced that this whole adventure was a bad idea. Very. I was just wondering how humiliated I would feel if I got the hell out of here, when the front door of the dismal place swung open, and out stepped Sir Eravist. Shit, I hissed, pressing myself as close to the earth as I could. Maud scampered up beside me, sitting on her hindquarters to see what was going on. Get down! Get down! I whispered. She gave me a glance full of scorn and stayed right where she was. I watched through the weeds. Sir Eravist's red dragon vest blazed bright against the drab stone of the house. His black hair stirred in the autumn breeze. With his bright eyes and his handsome young face and his trim, sharp beard, he was the very image of a warrior. Even though the lump he'd given me had been healed by the nymphs, I thought I could feel it throbbing on my forehead. My heart thundered against the ground. "What's he doing here?" I said.
"He's the captain of the castle guard," said Maud.
She didn't even bother to whisper.
"He's smart and loyal to Iron, who's given him everything he has. And he's deadly with a sword. My guess is he's waiting for you."
"What?"
"Shh! Do you want them to hear you? Look!"
Now, 2 other guards stepped out of the house and flanked their captain. Erebus gave them instructions, the wordless sound of his voice carrying to us on the breeze. The guards moved off to walk around the house, checking the windows and doors and looking into the distance to see if anyone was nearby. If I had pressed any closer to the earth, I would have sunk into it. I clutched the dead grass with sweaty hands. What the hell was I doing here? Forget the sword and the oak. I was not the right guy for this kind of work. I was a jackass to have even thought I could handle it. Said the mutant rodent beside me. I glanced up at her from the dirt. Her eyes had shifted back to the house. I followed her gaze. Lady Betheray. She had appeared on the small balcony outside a third-floor gable window. Seeing her there, I held my breath. I was struck to the heart again by her serene and regal femininity. She was standing as she had stood on the witness stand, very straight, very still, her hands clasped before her. She was wearing some sort of white, full-length, flowing gown, belted at the waist so that her full, soft shape pressed through the fabric. God, she was beautiful. She gave a brief glance down at Erebus, a glance of pure disdain. Then she looked away, off into the distance to her right, as if searching the horizon for someone's approach. I looked too, and I saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. "Maud!" I whispered. The mutant rodent looked at me, then off down the road, the weird squirrely eyes in her weird woman's face narrowing. As if I needed something to increase my already overbrimming anxiety, I saw the line of her mouth tighten as if with fear. "What?" I said. "What is it? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Tense as a bowstring, I lay where I was and watched the cloud of dust move over the rim of the furthest hill. It descended swiftly along the broken road, growing closer, larger. Soon, the ghostly shape of an ornate carriage appeared within the cloud. It was a fine vehicle, drawn by 4 white horses. It had twining golden trim around the windows and along the edge of the roof, golden shields at intervals on the sides and a golden crown on top. It had burnished brown doors with elegant paintings on them. Cherubs, I think, though I couldn't see clearly from so far away. "That's got to be Lord Iron, right?" I said. Maud nodded grimly.
"And Curtin."
"The wizard? I thought he could only work in the city."
"He's strongest in the city, but we're not very far away."
"You sure it's him?" Another grim nod.
"The driver."
I turned from her fearful face to watch the carriage pull up before the mansion door, its horses straining and whinnying in their traces. Sure enough, there was Curtin. He was sitting up in the driver's seat, the reins in his hands. He was unmistakable in his flowing robe of liquid darkness, with his wizened little raisined face sporting its tufts of white hair on the crown and at the chin. From where I was, I couldn't make out the glittering eyes in the folds of his wrinkles, but I remembered the wicked gleam of them.
"Iron must have a reason for bringing him here," Maud said, "and not a good one."
The next moment, Lord Iron stepped out of the carriage. I could see his light hair capping his broad, virile figure. Curtin descended from the high seat, his dark robe swirling. Both men stepped up to greet Sir Erebus. I glanced from them up to the third-floor balcony. Even as far away as we were, and even with the afternoon shadows bathing her, I thought I saw Lady Betheray's pale cheeks grow paler. It was the sight of Curtin, I think. I think she was afraid of him. She stared down at the men below her for a long moment. Then she swiveled around quickly and vanished into the house. "What are they going to do to her?" I asked Maud, but the mutant rat girl only shook her head. The 2 guards who had searched the perimeter of the house now returned to the front door. All 5 of the men went into Netherdale. I could hear the door of the house shut behind them. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt a fear even greater than my fear for my own safety. "I have to go down there," I said. Maud snorted at me with disdain.
"What do you think you can do?"
"I don't know."
"Then what's the point?"
"Well, Jesus, you're the one who's always rolling your eyes at me."
"Because look at you."
"Okay," I said. "So now I'm, going to do something."
"Yes, you're going to get yourself killed."
Well,
don't expect me to wait around for you,"
she said angrily. "I don't." I said, "Go."
"Don't think I won't."
"Go ahead."
"I will."
I got to my feet.
"This is ridiculous,"
Maud said,
"I don't care who they think you are."
but I was already moving toward the mansion.
This has been Another Kingdom by Andrew Clavin, performed by Michael Knowles.